Welcome, everybody. This is the Cybersecurity in Financial Services panel hosted by the CFA San Francisco Society. And I'm Will Brokaw, and I'll be your moderator today. We have three really exciting panelists. I think this would be a really awesome event. Just first off, I'd like to announce that this is going to be a publicly recorded event. We will not disclose any of the audience members, but this will be a recorded event. So if you ask any questions at the end of this panel, that will be recorded. And just a brief disclosure, the purpose of this panel is for informational purposes only. This is not intended to be investment advice. It is not a solicitation to buy or sell any security. And additionally, these are personal opinions of the panelists. They do not represent their respective firms. And so just getting that disclosure out of the way. But without further ado, I'd like to announce myself. I'm Will Brokaw. I'm an associate at Top Tier Capital Partners, which is a growth stage venture capital firm. We invest directly in startups, mostly Series B, Series C, B2B, and consumer technology companies. We also do secondaries, direct secondaries, and LP and GP secondaries, and make primary investments in venture capital funds. I would like to announce, our panelists today. We have Joseph, who is the Chief Information Officer at Sagard, Roman, who is the co-founder and COO of HYPR, and Jake Seid, who is the general partner at Ballistic Ventures. And so, Joseph, you want to start off by just sharing a little bit about your background and what Sagard does?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Joseph Lau. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Sagard. Sagard is an alternative asset manager. So we do many different things. We do venture capital. We do venture building. We have a PE arm. We have private credit. We do family offices, and we do real estate. So pretty much everything. It's a very quick, fast-growing firm. We have offices in Toronto, Montreal, New York City, Los Angeles, and Denver, and Paris, and Abu Dhabi. And I'm missing a couple probably as well. So I've been with the firm since November 2019. And when I started there, we had 2.8 billion AUM, and it's been a rocket ship and a really rough ride, but we're at 25 billion AUM now. In terms of my background, before I entered the dark side, I spent 19 years in government in national security intelligence for the Canadian government. And my last job before leaving government was as head of critical infrastructure.
Great. Roman, you want to share as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Roman Kadinsky here. I'm the president and COO of HYPR. We're a New York-based identity security platform focused on workforce and customer-facing use cases to defeat modern identity fraud. We do this by unifying phishing-resistant passwordless authentication, adaptive risk, and automated identity verification products. We've been around for about 10 years now. We actually just had our 10-year incorporation date 2 days ago, which is a date that's always in my head. It's probably being a finance guy at heart. And we're about 100 people now. We service 2 of the top 4 largest US banks and many others. Fun fact, I am actually a CFA charter holder. I do remember how to say that correctly. My past life before this was I was at Goldman for about half a decade, and before that, Forex Capital Markets.
Thank you. All right, Jake.
Yeah, thank you. Jake Seid, I co-founded Ballistic Ventures. We're an early stage cybersecurity focused venture firm. Before this, ran my own venture capital firm where I invested in a number of cybersecurity companies, Netscope, Cato, Abnormal Security, Drata, and others you might know of. Before that was the youngest person on the team to launch Lightspeed Venture Partners, spent 11 years there. And before that, launched a business unit at Cisco. We became the fastest 0 to $1 billion run rate business unit in Cisco's history.
Great. And let's kick things off. So Joseph, can you tell us about the biggest cyber threats that Sagard and other cyber or financial institutions face?
Sure. So I think I'll highlight 3 big ones. The first one is financial theft, specifically wire transfer fraud. So I think especially working in finance, sometimes you see some very large wires going through. And I guess the best thing I would say about protecting against that is have human protocols in place and make sure that you have those down pat. And the other thing I would mention about that is it's very simple, but just slow down. And if it seems suspicious, slow down even further. The second one's ransomware. Ransomware is really big business. And what I would say about that topic is have your executives have a really serious discussion about under what circumstances they would actually pay ransom before an event happens. I've worked with a lot of companies, and it's very hard not to pay the ransom when you're in the middle of thick of things and people have locked up your systems, and there's basically a gun to your head. The third one I'd mention is data theft or data breaches, theft of information. And like just yesterday, there was an interesting article about a firm that does security background checks, and that was hacked, and over 3 billion personal records were stolen. So I think those are fairly those are the biggest cyber threats that you see across the financial institutions.
Mm-hmm. And Roman and Jake, yeah, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So we actually recently published our 4th annual State of Passwordless Identity Assurance Report, and some of the big findings continue to relate around identity-based attacks, where as much as 80% of breaches generally have an authentication weakness or credential reuse or credential problem as part of the root cause. So a lot of the data breaches we're seeing, a lot of the events that lead to ransomware, a lot of it starts with credentials and authentication. So really that's, we're kind of fortunate that that is our focus area. But we also see that financials have definitely invested heavily in this. There are some great foundations in place, both for the consumers and the workforce around identity and access management, multi-factor authentication, and endpoint detection and response. So we're kind of looking ahead and still focused on helping enterprises solve some of these problems. So anything you can do to help eliminate shared secrets, whether it be for authentication or credentials, or help to prevent against AI attacks that go after these things, that's where we're seeing a lot of interest activity.
Yeah, and I'll just extend that. Identity has been an area where we've made 3 investments so far. A lot of people, when they think about identity, they think about human identity, which is obviously very important, but we've also invested in companies trying to address non-human or workload identity as well. And you have similar challenges, credential reuse, long-lived secrets, the need to do conditional access around a workload that's trying to authenticate to another workload. And turns out there's at least an order of magnitude more non-human identities than human identities, and obviously growing faster. The other area that relates to some of the topics that Joseph mentioned is, how kind of financial fraud is accelerated in a world of deep fakes. And so we think that's an important area to address, especially for financial organizations where, the days of just voice printing somebody to know it's them no longer work, because you can clone somebody's voice, you can clone somebody's image. You don't know if I'm actually me on this Zoom. And so how you address deep fakes in financial transactions, we think is critical. And there's been very high profile, multi-tens of millions of dollars breaches that have happened. And then, would also touch on, this area of ransomware, which is a very difficult multi-pronged problem, but one where we've made an investment to, take a new architectural approach. And that's the other thing that we look at is how do you apply modern architectures to some of these long-standing problems in security? And we'll be able to talk more about that as we go.
Definitely. And Joseph, I'm curious, how do you think about measuring proactive versus reactive cyber resistance, I guess? And are you focused mostly on the proactive side?
So I think it's multifaceted in terms of how you can approach it. But I think truly the best ROI you're going to get in terms of cybersecurity spend is actually on educating your workforce. Cybersecurity awareness training is super, super important. So every employee should be getting that on a regular annual basis or more often. And then I also think that especially when I live in startup land quite a bit as well, and also for large enterprises, is to actually have the software developers and the software engineers trained on secure development as well, because it's a lot easier to defend a securely developed platform than it is one that isn't particularly well thought out. So I think education is probably the best way to spend proactively. Reactively, there's a lot of different technologies out there.
Mm-hmm. And with the cyber landscape changing faster and faster, are you implementing new solutions faster as well to keep up? How are you kind of thinking about managing that?
So the way I think about it is, especially in the reactive space, is I actually now have like a line item in my budget where it's cyber stuff, where I have money set aside for emerging threats or ones that we're facing a dramatic increase in. So, for example, this most recent year, phishing attacks have gotten more and more sophisticated. Jack alluded to it, but all the AI talk around LLMs and so forth, they've made phishing emails a lot better. There's no more broken English, and being a global firm, we have our French subsidiary. They have perfect French phishing emails now too. Just that translation part of it. So to combat that, we've actually implemented some advanced AI email protection in front of we use Google Workspace in front of our Google servers that uses AI to provide advanced detection there. So I think when you're looking at how quickly things are evolving, you actually can't just stand still. You have to actually be moving forward and moving forward quicker than in the past.
Jake, would you agree with that? Are you seeing a lot of your portfolio companies, is there more momentum on the larger financial institution side where they're implementing new solutions, or is it kind of a slower grind? And a lot of these old institutions really just using the existing platforms out there?
I think there's a lot of interest from large financial institutions in modern security. Again, you just open the news any day and we see, the legacy solutions aren't, necessarily working. And so a number of attacks are getting through and people are looking at best of breed. Obviously, large financial institutions spend time to make sure that what a startup says they can do, it actually does and can actually scale to support the needs of a large complex company. So I wouldn't categorize the process there as fast. I'd characterize it as they're very open and active and engaging with the startup community to look for new architectures, again, modern approaches to solving both traditional threat vectors and the new threat vectors that have started to emerge. But that said, the companies that we tend to fund actually, we'll see customer interest up and down the stack from the large financial institutions to smaller fintech companies, but also to other regulated industries. You look at healthcare and you look at the Change Health, United Health breach, really sending ripples through that entire industry. So I think across the board, you're seeing large companies really engage with startups to say, look, we need the best product, not just the thing that's bundled with our enterprise license.
And Roman, in your experience, how has it been building trust with these institutions that are probably in the past have used some of these just existing platforms?
Yeah, I mean, as a cybersecurity startup, I think we face two major challenges. The door into an enterprise requires a lot of trust and scrutiny. You can't replace one target with another, which would be yourselves. So as a startup, it is really important to do a lot of the things that enterprises do for their own workforces, SOC 2 Type 2, red teaming yourselves, having a good bounty program, having good developer training on secure coding practices, as well as how to spot phishing attacks and all those kinds of things. If you don't do that as a cybersecurity company, your security product might be great, but you'll just shift the attack surface to asking a hacker to go after your company instead. So that's a very high bar, I'd say, that I always tell every new joiner, if you're going to start a company, don't start a cybersecurity company or do enterprise sales. It's an uphill battle. And it's probably the least fun part about the product, but it's an important business thing you have to do. The other thing that's really important is just being relevant. There's so many cybersecurity companies, so many products that all claim to solve the most important problem in cybersecurity. So to really stand out in a climate like that, you have to really solve a problem that enterprises believe is sort of, a real crown jewel type of problem. And you have to do it really, really well, and also help them figure out how they can get more out of the solutions that they do spend lots of money on and have deployed at scale.
Makes sense. And moving to you, Jake, what do you see, what areas of cybersecurity are getting the most attention, particularly when it comes to servicing financial institutions? What are you seeing in the market right now as an investor?
Yeah, there's really kind of a fresh look being taken to a lot of different areas. As I mentioned, the whole identity landscape is an opportunity for a revisit. Some of the incumbents in the space, they were started 20 years ago or more, and architectures have obviously shifted dramatically since then. This idea that Joseph mentioned, which is ultimately, you can't just slap security on at the end and kind of take this ticket and fix it approach and then chase people down for having violated security. So I think companies that take this approach that shifts security from ticket and fix it to true guardrails in production is a thesis that we're looking at just generally. And, what does that mean? It means that, in the old days, a cybersecurity startup might be interesting if they offered more security, even if it was at the detriment of business moving fast. Now, our belief is that's a false choice. Any security company that we fund today, it has to be both. You have to make a company more secure, and you have to let the company move faster, the engineers move faster, the business leaders move faster. Having a trade-off is no longer acceptable.
Interesting. So I think we touched on this a little bit, but I think it's a really interesting topic and what I'd love to get into, and that is the impact of AI on cybersecurity to date. And so I guess we talked about this in our pre-call a little bit, but Joseph, I'd love for you to start and really hear all of your guys' thoughts here. But what have you seen to date, the impact of AI over the last couple of years?
I think AI is definitely going to fundamentally change cybersecurity, both on the offensive side and on the defensive side. So on the offensive side, now ChatGPT-4 can actually generate attacks based on security advisories. So how well it does that is up for debate, but the fact that it can generate what I would call candidates for or proof of concept for attacks based on a security advisory is scary, because what that means is especially for large enterprises, they usually have patching cycles on the months or weeks. And now they're going to need to really shorten that, because if there's no patch, if they don't patch in time, AI can automatically generate those attacks. So that's something that's here today, and there's been just very early research in terms of how well they can do that. But the extension of that type of capability is that at some point there's going to be AIs that can generate what's called 0 days, which are previously unknown attacks, which is you can't defend against it by definition. So I think on the offensive side, that's sort of where the AI is leading us to. And then also on the frauds side, Jake already mentioned it, but you can actually get skins over your face to impersonate other people, and voices are very, very easy to impersonate as well. So with a let's say less than 5-minute audio clip of somebody talking, you can get a near perfect intonation about how they speak. So how does that affect video conferencing? How does that affect remote board meetings? How does that affect a whole bunch of things? So this is all going to come back to Roman's side of things, is how do you authenticate, and how do you actually prove you are who you are when you're going on to these? So that's some of the some of my thoughts on that. And I really think you're gonna have good AIs versus bad AIs, very much like a science fiction novel.
I'd also add that, on the AI side, our view is AI is kind of like the internet, right? When the internet first hit the scene, people were going to use the internet to be more productive, to kind of do whatever they needed to do. And you had a whole kind of security industry that got created around enabling enterprise employees to safely use the internet. And so we think in a parallel way, there's opportunities for a generation of cybersecurity companies, and we funded one of them called Witness AI to enable enterprise employees to safely, responsibly use all the Gen AI that employees want to use that's out there. And so, on one hand, there's an element of, AI fighting AI in kind of the cyber, cat and mouse game. But there's also an element which is, hey, how do we just enable the employees to use what's out there and make them more productive, but not compromise knowingly or unknowingly the enterprise that they work for?
Yeah, and I'll just echo some of the points that both Joseph and Jack had shared. One of the interesting stats that we had in our report this year was that the single greatest threat that practitioners felt was from AI, but at the same time, the single biggest opportunity sought to combat these cyber threats was also from what AI can do. I think most people would agree that right now the scales have kind of tipped in favor of the adversary. And somebody with very little experience can all of a sudden do very elaborate social engineering attacks. But as more tools come online, I think certainly the balance can kind of shift back towards the center.
And is it impacting credentialing a lot? Are you seeing that with passwords being especially weak now, given AI? Or
yeah, I mean, one thing that's really interesting is, some of the things you could already start to do a little bit with machine learning in the past, you can do even faster and in more real time. If your password might be Joseph123 or like your sister's name and some combination, you could use some of the generative AI things to create different permutations that relate to the original permutation. So, if it's not his sister as the first word, maybe it's someone else in his family, and let it go online and try to get those kinds of different things to try out. So in terms of, making brute force attacks more effective, even that is now more effective. And that, people kind of thought that was going to be kind of yesteryear's problem. I think this is part of why it's really important for a lot of solutions to actually try to address the root cause problem. So kind of in our case, if you're going to say that you have a true passwordless solution, the fallback can't then be a password, because the hackers will always go after the weakest point.
And do you think MFA is at risk as well?
I think elements of MFA can certainly be more susceptible on their own. So if you are using, password plus MFA and it's, a weak form of multi-factor, it might be easier to get through it. So for example, SIM swapping attacks have become easier to produce, because if I'm going to call your telephone provider and convince them that I'm you and get your SIM card swapped into my phone, it might be easier to do that than it used to be, especially with the aid of AI.
And this one maybe be for all of you guys, but do you think AI is going to get to a point, Joseph, you mentioned the face AI and the voice AI, and do you think where it's going to be where even biometrics, authentication could be at risk from AI, or is, they're going to have those liveness tests that will hopefully...
Yes, so the liveness tests are actually broken now already. So I'm sure most of the people on this call have done it before, is where you hold up your ID, like your driver's license, and it matches to your face. That's actually broken. It's been shown that doesn't work anymore, or it's easily defeated. So liveness test is really difficult if I can build a perfect skin over my face and to pretend I'm there. So I think where the world's going to go to is as you log into, let's say, a Zoom meeting, this is pushing the problem over to Zoom, but how you authenticate into that and prove who you are is going to be more mathematically based versus biometrics based.
Yeah, I'd say that, there's elements of biometrics that, are stronger. I would argue that, a face and a voice these days are no longer, at least when it comes to Zoom, not really biometrics per se. It's just pixels. And so separating pixels and bits from biometrics, like, okay, if I'm using an iPhone to actually do a Face ID and it's got like a 3D scan of my face, or I'm touching the biometric sensor on my laptop, I think those are still also powerful authentication mechanisms. And I view that as different than kind of pixels and bits when it comes to audio and video calls or Zooms.
Okay, so in that sense, you would probably be able to detect some, I guess, or authenticate.
Again, it goes to this authentication question, right? It goes back to, again, something that comes up again and again is the identity problem. And ultimately, the identity problem is one of the most fundamental, because obviously, this whole thing was kind of designed to be anonymous early on, and identity wasn't really forged into the fabric early on. And so now we're kind of glomming on identity in different ways. And so as a result, this new threat vector of deep fakes, both video and audio, you have to find a different way to authenticate people, possibly through Zoom or possibly through third-party solutions that'll say, look, I'm agnostic of Zoom and Teams and, whatever the channel is, or a customer calling in and requesting a wire over the voice call. Our view is that the opportunity really is omni-channel. And enterprises need omni-channel solutions because the threat is omni-channel.
Anything to add there, Roman? I know you turn your.
Yeah, I just kind of echoing on what Joseph had shared as well is, a big part of it ultimately kind of comes down to how you're authenticating. So, the driver's license scan or kind of any sort of like shared secret against a repository, those things are certainly going to be easier and easier. And this is where I think you're seeing more and more enterprises and cybersecurity companies talking about, some of the more cryptographic type approaches like public-private key pairs, PKI infrastructure that's been around for a long time as well, and what it can now do, and things like hardware isolation on mobile devices or security keys that, it's not just about the biometric, but it's about actually unlocking a challenge that lives on my device and getting to my private key to sign that challenge. So being able to kind of require the user to not just prove something, but to actually have something can help with that story where, some hacker sitting in a faraway place can't just easily do it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. All right, thanks, guys. That was great. And moving on, so Jake, I'd love to just briefly talk. Recently, Wiz has raised $1 billion round at a $12 billion post-money valuation. Rubrik is filing for an IPO. Do you see these as bellwethers in the space and kind of reopening the cybersecurity venture capital landscape for more financings and exits in the space?
Well, and Rubrik's not only filed, they've gone public. And so,
excuse me. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's, more than bellwethers for, the cybersecurity industry. I think what they really point to is the fundamental importance of cybersecurity in the global economy. When I was at Lightspeed, if you had a $500 million exit in cybersecurity, that was a big deal. And why? Well, you had a director of information security, and if there was a breach that happened, the CEO probably wouldn't know, and somebody would say, hey, restore the backups, change the passwords, who cares? Now who cares? The CEO cares, the board cares, the customers care, the shareholders care. Why? Because the threat is now existential. If the cybersecurity doesn't work, the business doesn't work. And so I think much more so than bellwethers for the sector, they're really, a sign that, the sector is just really changed in its importance as a pillar of the economy of enabling the economy to work or not work.
Interesting. And we've talked a lot about identity security. Do you see any other areas like third-party risk management, API security that are up and coming?
Yeah, so certainly third-party risk management is an area that needs to be addressed. Obviously, you see things like SolarWinds, where we're just incredibly interconnected through supply chains and software supply chains. And so more and more of that needs to move from manual processes to I'd say software and solutions that help make that chain more secure. Another kind of theme that we continue to look at, it relates to what Joseph talked about, the whole shift left. How do you have more security earlier on in the process? We invest in a company called Pangea that actually doesn't sell to security, they sell to the development teams, and they help the development teams move faster through basically security APIs. And now instead of having to rewrite and reinvent, you call a security API, or Ambit, which sells to DevOps, which enables them to secure their non-human identities in effectively a secretless way. And so that shift left, theme is we think just getting started.
Anything to add there, Joseph and Roman?
So I think one area that I feel requires a lot more investment, and I'd love to see a lot more startups in that space, is on the operational technology side. So where IT, information technology, touches OT, there's huge cyber risk there. So wearing my former government hat as head of critical infrastructure here in Canada, you're talking about like energy companies. Like, how do they protect themselves, right? How do you protect physical systems? So that's an area of research that I don't feel enough has been done, especially with the consolidation, Internet of Things, and so forth. Everyone wants to put things online so that it's easier to manage, but there's significant risk that comes with that. And then I think the other thing overall in terms of investing in cybersecurity, I'm super bullish on the space because this is the third, cybercrime is the third largest economy in the world now. That's how big it is. They're saying 2023 it was $8 trillion, $8 trillion with the capital T, and by 2025 it's going to be 10.5 trillion dollars in terms of and that's everything involved, like ransomware, like brand damage, rebuilding your systems and all that. So the cyber criminals are causing all this damage, and it's huge business, especially on the ransomware side. So large companies don't really have a choice there. So I love hearing about huge success stories like Wiz. Like, it's insane how quickly that company grew. If I remember correctly, it was I want to say they hit 100 million ARR in like 18 months. Jake can probably knows that number better than I do, but it's just those types of stories. We need people excited about cybersecurity startups. We need people innovating in this space because the hackers definitely are, and they also, the hackers often they're selling or they're sharing their source code back and forth, or they make it available for purchase on the dark web.
Interesting. And I do see we have some questions here. Joseph, if you want to quickly just tell us how you feel about cyber insurance.
I'm pro cyber insurance if it's used properly. Cyber insurance has been a really rough market. It's been up and down. It's gone back down now. I'm worried about companies that use that as a complete risk transfer mechanism, and they're very eager to pay ransoms to ransomware operators, which creates an incentive where they're going to make better and better ransomware, and that bothers me a lot. I think most governments advise not to pay the ransom, but it's very difficult when you're facing a situation where there's a ransom being demanded and it's stopped your company and it's costing you hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. However, what I would say is if you have that discussion beforehand, it makes that decision-making process a lot easier. I advise most of our companies to have enough coverage to rebuild your systems, but try not to pay ransoms unless there's a direct threat to loss of life, which is extremely rare in finance.
Mm-hmm. And Jake, it looks like we have another question around the fragmentation of the cybersecurity market, and how do you find differentiation? How do you kind of pick out the winners in the space?
Yeah, so a couple things. Again, there's a lot of cybersecurity companies out there, but at the same time, I mentioned it before, open the news and we know the problems are not solved. So ultimately, we're looking for companies that are solving large horizontal problems. And these are things that really cannot be features of existing companies or something that an existing company can build in 6 months or 12 months. And so we typically look for a fundamentally new architecture to try and solve the problem. Architectural changes are things that large incumbent companies can't do easily and typically just don't do. We also obviously bet on teams. And so, looking for the right DNA in the teams to build a company, scale a company. Our focus is on companies that ultimately can be large enough to be large public companies. And so again, what is the total available market? How differentiated and how strong is the team?
Mm-hmm. And another question, any ideas around how cybersecurity will play a role in the coming talent landscape? I've noticed movements in which software engineers are organizing to privatize their work so AI can't replicate and get them fired. Do you see a big fight for privacy coming? Open for any of you guys?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of it.
Just go ahead. Yeah.
Sure, and I'll pass the rest. I'd say on the cybersecurity front, there's never been a more exciting time to work in cybersecurity. And not just because there's a lot of opportunity and big companies and all that stuff. Look, I think up until, even the past 5 years or even more recently, a lot of cybersecurity is kind of what Joseph said earlier. There's always been a trade-off between security and user experience. And nowadays, if you want to deploy a strong solution at your enterprise, that can't be the trade-off. You've got to make businesses more productive. You have to make the user experience better. And cybersecurity in the past was not known for that. So it's actually very exciting to be part of something where you're not only helping protect against breaches, potentially saving lives, but you're also helping transform and move a business faster. And Jack or Joseph, if you have views on the privacy fight or the privatization, I'm not too sure about that one.
I throw one thing out, which is, the internet was built for privacy last, right? From the sense of us as users, it's an interesting, kind of dichotomy that on one hand you could be anonymous, on the other hand, the business model of the internet is to basically use all our information everywhere all the time. And so I do think that there are companies that are going to rethink foundational services for privacy first versus privacy last. We're keeping an eye out for those types of companies, but you look at, I remember being in San Francisco looking out, kind of one of the windows, and you see the Apple iPhone ads, and Apple had one message to convince you on why to buy an iPhone, and the message was privacy. And so, very clear that consumers value privacy and are now becoming aware of how privacy is being compromised. And I think there'll be a lot of opportunity for companies to rethink the fundamental services of the internet for privacy first.
San Francisco's in California, and California has some of the strongest privacy laws in the US. It's very comparable to the European GDPR, it's called. Since Sagard operates in so many different environments, I have to deal with a lot of that stuff. I think when I think about privacy, I think it actually is a fairly basic problem that gets really, really complicated really quickly. So I would say that the best advice I can give people, and I say this all the time, is keep your work data away from your personal data. Don't send stuff from your personal email. And from a business perspective, understand what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and understand the regulatory regimes in terms of how long you have to store it as well. So that data classification problem sort of is the first step there. And then after that, there's many companies that are looking after the problem is called data loss prevention, and that helps a lot from the privacy perspective. However, everybody being online and all these companies operating online, even if you didn't intend to share that information, sometimes it does get shared. So the example I had given earlier in terms of that company that was doing security background checks, if you apply for a job, you don't really have a choice in terms of which company is going to be doing your background check. You just sort of acknowledge that, and then you're just hoping that the information that in some particular security background checks can be quite invasive. You're just hoping that they protect that data well. So it's a really, really hard problem. But I think from a practical or a pragmatic perspective, just make sure you keep your work data separate from your personal data, and especially because people change jobs. So intermingling the two can get really, really messy.
Great, thank you. Well, any final remarks from the panelists?
Well, thank you for having us.
Could I close with a joke? Because I love to
Love
make
that.
people groan with this weird intersection of cyber dad jokes. What is Forrest Gump's password? 1 Forrest 1.
That's great. I was going to open it up for the Q&A section. Well, thanks so much, guys. This has been a really awesome event, and yeah, appreciate everyone who attended. But panelists, I thought it was a really interesting conversation, and yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me in the coming weeks. Take care, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you for having us.